千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let us continue with Tao Te Ching 28. Last time, we talked about the title of this chapter being Eternal Virtue. This term is repeated 3 times in the chapter, indicating its importance. Eternal virtue is the potential within you to perfect your virtuous nature and the actualization of that potential. In the Tao transformation of the self, whenever you get to a point where a particular virtue becomes second nature to you, that virtue makes the transition from something you do to something you are. For instance, as we mentioned previously, instead of practicing compassion, you become a naturally compassionate person. In other words, what we're talking about here is the mechanism for making a real, lasting change. It is the mechanism for spiritual refinement. And as such, it is at the heart of the Tao process for all of us. It is the reason why we walk the path. Tao Te Ching 28. This is how the chapter looks. And as always, we did our sectional analysis to see the structure of this chapter. We identified 3 sections. Each of the sections follows the same sequence of lines. And when they're shown like this, those repetitive patterns become apparent. What you're seeing here in this slide is the kind of analysis and insight that I believe one cannot easily find anywhere else. Just by looking at this structure visually, you can tell the 3 sections are the 3 ways that Lao Tzu uses to explain the overall concept of the eternal virtue. And last time, we were able to cover part 1 and part 2 of that explanation. Today, our goal is to continue on to part 3 and then the concluding section, which is part 4 at the bottom. This view also reveals that part 4 has no repeating patterns like the previous 3 parts. So let us do a quick recap on what we talked about for part 1 and part 2. We started with this key statement, know the masculine, hold to the feminine. as we discussed previously, this being one of the three ways to express the overall concept, which we can frame as know the yang principle, but hold to the yin principle. And because of that statement, it is why I specifically mentioned that the yin and yang concept is not necessarily always a 50-50 split when you apply it to real life. Lao Tzu is telling us specifically that we should hold to the yin consistently all the time, not sometimes or half the time. Continuing with the recap. In the first part, it ends with the statement, return to the state of the infant. Of course, we know this is not in the literal sense of becoming childish. Rather, it means returning to the most spiritually powerful state, the state before we all became lost and confused, stressed out and anxious in this world of ours. So, continuing with our recap, for section 2, the second part, we started with the statement, know the white, hold to the black. This is color symbology that was used by the ancients, but it is no longer used in this way in modern times. What is the meaning of the symbology? As we discussed, the white is the highly visible. The black is the unseen or unnoticed. And the way that I described it was that the black is the dimly lit, while the white is the brilliant or the glare. Most people tend to prefer the former, the white or the high profile, high visibility. That is, they prefer to be seen far and wide, which means to be famous. They regard it as a good thing to be the center of attention. Therefore, they pursue fame. Lao Tzu tells us to know, to understand about this pursuit, to empathize with the need for that kind of attention. But rather than to pursue being seen ourselves, it is better, it is the Tao, to hold to the yin principle, the black, the unseen, which is the foundation, the basis that most people do not pay attention to. If we were to use a plant or a tree as an example, the trunk, branches, and leaves would be the part of the tree or plant that are readily visible. The flowers and fruits get people's attention. But the most essential part, while it's the root system, which is not readily visible, but without it, nothing above ground is possible. Hence the importance of holding to the unseen or the black. Part 2 ends with the statement, return to the state of the boundless. This is where we ended our discussion last time. The last line of this section about the boundless has multiple layers of meaning. On the one hand, we can see the connection that when your focus is on cultivating the internal, non-visible aspects of yourself and not on external appearance, not on cultivating this image that people like to project, well, then you naturally become more and more refined and more capable as an individual. There is literally no limit to what you can attain. Now, the other important part of the meaning, the other layer, is expressed in the last bullet point in this slide. For me personally, I feel this is especially important. Returning to the state of the boundless can also mean returning to the Tao, because the Tao is without limits or boundaries. When I say returning to the Tao, I am referring to the trip that you and I, all of us, will make in the future. We will go on that trip returning to the Tao when this lifetime comes to an end. So in the previous section, we talked about how the state of the infant is a spiritually powerful state of purity and unity. In this section, returning to the boundless, the Tao, is also spiritually powerful in its own way. This is something that we can see in our world. For instance, when people realize the end is near, they usually gain moments of spiritual clarity. They reflect on the life they have lived, that they are about to leave behind forever. For some of them, that moment of revelation can be about how they have not lived as they should and how they wish it could be different. So this is a subject that has been studied extensively. There are definitely many commonalities that people share. The deathbed awakening or enlightenment. That is why I have a two-way street or a two-sided arrow between the two. To be spiritually awakened and enlightened is to understand and see the reality of life and death. Conversely, when you see it so clearly that your life is about to end, you're at the edge of death, that can be the moment of spiritual awakening and enlightenment. So for as long as human beings have existed, there's always been this powerful connection. And we can see that when people are nearing the end and see life and death clearly, they tend to have some common realizations. For instance, they realize that all the petty squabbles they had engaged in, well, they turned out to be meaningless. Holding on to resentment, holding on to anger, well, that only harmed themselves. To forgive and let go would have been far better. And all the worrying about what other people thought was a profound waste of time. They realized that true happiness would be really an internal sense of fulfillment. It really has nothing to do with external approval. So that is another realization that can dawn on someone. And what about regrets? So for one thing, they regret not having pursued their passions, that they've been held back for various reasons. And a common reason of this regret was fear. They were held back because of the fear of failure, fear of the unknown. And in a similar way, they regret not having lived more boldly, taken more risks, or embraced more adventures. This is related to the previous point. It's not exactly the same because there's plenty in the world that people wish to engage in that may not be a particular passion that they have, but may be an experience that they wish to have. So on that deathbed, they feel like they should have listened to their inner voice, that longing to live life differently and not follow the pattern society has set for them. This leads to the wishes that they have as they are thinking about all of these, all the regrets, the realizations. They wish they had lived true to themselves and not be bound by societal expectations. They wish they had cherished friends and family more and focused on material pursuits less. They wish they had expressed their love more openly, rather than leaving words unspoken. They wish they had truly lived in the present moment instead of the past and future. To live in the past is to be obsessed and attached to what could have been, what should have been done, what should have been said. To live in the future means worries and anxieties about what is yet to come, the what if scenarios. But then, regardless of those worries and anxieties, the future comes no matter what. Some also say they wish they had made peace with their own imperfections and not strive for some sort of unattainable ideal. So, in a sense, in a real sense, imperfection is perfection in its own way. Perfect symmetry gets boring. Variety is the spice of life. So, looking at all these, the realization is that everything we're looking at in this slide, we can understand right now before we ourselves reach the end, before we ourselves are lying on that deathbed. To know this, to know that we don't have to wait, empowers us to live more fully. Embrace the life that you were always meant to live. We can return to the simplicity or the boundless of 无极 whenever we experience this epiphany. For some people, they may have the realization when it is already too late to do anything about it. But you and I, we can have the same realization today. We can start living life the way we should from this moment on. So Lao Tzu says, return to the state of the boundless. Now we can see the true meaning in this line. More than just returning to the Tao upon death, it means becoming a boundless individual, unlimited individual in life. With the synergism of yin and yang, you and I can transcend limitations. We can go beyond boundaries that used to constrain us. So this is the deeper level of the wisdom from Lao Tzu. Elsewhere in the Tao Te Ching, he writes, when you are at this state of being, there is nothing one cannot do. Moving on now to line 11. This is the beginning of the third and last part of the 3 parts explanation. And the line is, know the honor, hold to the humility. This matches the previous 2 sections because to be honored is to be overt, obvious, and highly visible. That is the Yang principle. Whereas when we talk about hold to the humility, that too matches the previous 2 sections because to be humbled is to be covert and unseen, the Yin principle. So specifically here, to know honor means having success externally and richness internally. And this is why Lao Tzu uses that color symbology. White denotes the highly visible. The Yang principle describes that active, dynamic, and easily seen nature in that complement of the yin and yang duality. Conversely, the black denotes the hidden. The feminine yin principle describes the reserved, the observant. And then back to honor. When I say internal richness, it means to be content, the true kind of wealth, as opposed to those who may possess a lot materially, but then feel this empty void within, so that any satisfaction or fulfillment will be fleeting at best. To hold humility, remaining humble despite the above. So you know success, you know this internal richness, but you hold to being humble regardless of all that. This is crucial, especially for those who are highly accomplished, or for you when you become even more accomplished. And to hold to the humility means that one's past, like humble origins, struggles along the way, one's past must never be forgotten. One's roots must always be cherished and not hidden. They are an indispensable part of your journey. I have encountered people in my life who wish to hide or downplay their past. And it may be due to a feeling of shame, of embarrassment, and this will be contrary to the Tao. The Tao is not just about the flowers and the fruits, but the growth of the entire plant. It's not just about the harvest, but also about the tilling of the soil, planting of the seeds, caring for the crops. All the work that is required for the entire process. So moving on to line 12 says, be the valley of the world. This is connected to the previous line. They are seen as one unit of meaning. Why valley? A valley is a fertile, habitable area surrounded by mountains. So we know that. But what makes it such a recurring image in the study of the Tao? Well, the higher altitude of the mountains, surrounding mountains, represent the height of achievements, while the lower part, the center of the valley, the lower central region represents benefits for all. It's a habitable area, and those benefits are provided by the valley with openness and humility. So when you are the valley, you incorporate both honor and humility. This is what it means to embody the Tao image. And as I said, the valley is a recurring symbol of the Tao. When you embody the spirit of the valley, you take on the characteristics of the valley being nurturing, accommodating, receptive, and welcoming to the myriad things. In life, that just means you naturally will not engage in bickering with others. You will not bother fighting anyone over material gains. Why do that when the valley is so abundant? So the openness, being receptive and being accepting in life, it means you are able to accommodate diverse opinions different from your own. This may not be easy. It is something that I know a lot of us are working on. And beyond this idea of openness and receptivity, the nurturing nature of the valley can be seen in how it provides shelter and sustenance to the myriad things that live in the valley. Applied to life, it means when you master this symbology, you are naturally nurturing of everybody. This can be seen as an intersection between the Tao and Buddhism, because the characteristics that I mentioned map perfectly to the tolerance and compassion of the Maitreya Buddha. The Maitreya Buddha is well known in the West, being the valley is not so well known. Even for those who have some familiarity with the Tao, it is not as familiar as other metaphors, but it does come up quite frequently. We see it in Tao Te Ching 6. In lines 1 and 2, it says, the valley spirit, undying, is called the mystic female. So there it is again. It is the first iteration of the valley as a metaphor in the Tao Te Ching, but already we see the connection. The valley spirit is the mystic female. It is the yin aspect of the yin and yang symbol. And the same idea is also touched on in Tao Te Ching 15, not shown in this slide, but more specifically on the characteristic of openness, the receptivity, being welcoming to all. This, of course, leads to the ideal in the Tao that we should be nurturing and accommodating to everybody, just like the valley is to the myriad things. Looking further ahead, Tao Te Ching 32, we see lines 13 and 14. They say, the existence of the Tao in the world is like the streams in the valley into rivers and the ocean. This provides an overview of the world, humanity, and the Tao. This represents an image where the mountain streams flow into the river in the heart of the valley, and the river flows until it reaches the ocean. This is a poetic image with a multi-layer message, so we will circle back to it in the next slide to explore the various layers. For now, sticking to the topic of the recurrence of the valley image, we've got Tao Te Ching chapter 39, lines 5 and 6. The valley attained oneness and thus abundance. The myriad things attained oneness and thus life. This makes it quite clear the principle behind the flourishing and abundance is oneness, which in turn just means congruence, unity, and alignment with the Tao. It is the same principle that is the driving force of life. For the valley, the myriad things exist in harmony within nature. For us, it simply means when we bring ourselves into alignment, i.e., oneness with the Tao or unity with the Tao, we begin to see the same positive effects that lead to prosperity and abundance. Good things happen to us, and they happen seemingly out of nowhere. In reality, they originate from the Tao exactly as a sage would expect. So in your life, when you follow this particular path, you experience prosperity and abundance, you can get to a point where the more you bring benefits to others, to everyone around you, like the river providing water to the plants and animals, the more you do that, the more goodness and benefits come your way. Now, the reverse is equally predictable. In the same chapter, this chapter 39, Lao Tzu points out that if oneness is lacking, the valley will wither. This is when you veer away from the path, away from the Tao. The natural results of your departure from oneness may not be obvious at first, but over time, you will definitely notice, see, and feel the difference. Your life goes back to being as contentious as it used to be. You struggle in your daily existence. You become not so different from the people around you who do not know the Tao. This may be your cue to realize that the Tao may be subtle, but it definitely has a real and powerful effect on your life. It's an effect that you can feel in your bones. Lastly, we go to Tao Te Ching 66 with this mention of the valley. Lines 1 and 2. Rivers and oceans can be the kings of 100 valleys because of their goodness in staying low. So this is the last iteration of the image. It is an emphasis on humility in Tao cultivation. The reason why rivers and ultimately the ocean can be receiving of the goodness that flow into them is because of their lower position. So this means two things. One, for us in daily living, to be humble is to receive. We can observe this in the people who approach any subject from the perspective of humility and learning. They're the ones who learn and benefit from the lessons. Those who approach with arrogance instead of humility, they are not able to learn anything. And the other part of the meaning is that the highest should be the lowest. What that means is that the truly accomplished people should be the most down to earth. They are not always that way, but if they do not follow the Tao, their heights of accomplishments will be transient, will be impermanent. On the other hand, we observe how a lot of times people who proclaim themselves to be masters loudly talk about their mastery, they turn out not to be so masterful at all. But then those who remain quiet, friendly, approachable, well, they're the ones that can surprise you when their true mastery is revealed. So to encapsulate all of that, let me present this image of the valley. It's a way to see the totality of the concept. This is how a sage would envision it. This image shows mountains in the distance, between them a fertile valley with a river that flows through, winding its way through the heart of the valley. And here is how we can see the different layers of this metaphor. Let us start with the mountains. The valley is surrounded by mountains. They cradle the valley and protect it from the harsh weather. Since the beginning of life, a valley has always been a natural setting that becomes the preferred place to live for animals, and humans. Naturally situated between mountains, the mountains will shield the valley from strong winds. They blunt the force of an incoming hurricane. This protective effect can make a huge difference, especially in primitive times. Metaphorically, we can map this to the environment for life, our lives. So the overall setting in which we live, imagine that as the valley, because we come into this world, we find the requirements of life are already present. They are all around us. Therefore, in a real sense, we are shielded and protected as well. Protected by whom? Well, the Tao gives us the air to breathe, the water to slake our thirst, the food to satiate our hunger, the sun to provide daylight and warmth, the earth to provide stability, and so on. You and I can survive physically in this world, and more than that, we can thrive, just like the myriad things in the valley. The next step in this metaphor would be the streams that flow from the mountains. Snow on the mountain peaks melt, and the purest and most refreshing water flow into streams. So since the beginning of life, we know that the mountains are not static. They undergo constant changes in the sense that every winter, their peaks are covered in snow. Every spring, the snow melts with providing the fresh water flowing downward through brooks, creeks, streams, and so on. It is almost as if the mountain wakes up from its wintry slumber. The mountain comes alive. We can map this metaphor to our lives. We can see the streams as goodness. The pure streams of water comes from elevations higher up in the metaphor, from the top of the mountain. That makes them perfect to represent the good things in life that we feel seem to come from above. We have expressions like manna from heaven or heaven sent to describe the same feeling. Goodness flowing into our lives from heaven high above. A couple of important points to note about this metaphor. One, the sources of goodness, the streams, they are always present. The mountain will always have many streams. Life will always have many sources of goodness for us. Sometimes, I know when we feel hopeless, it seems like there's no help in sight. There's no help coming. Where are the streams of goodness? Well, just because we don't see them doesn't mean they are not present. It just means we're so trapped in misery that we are not able to take the steps in the right direction along the path to go to where the streams are so we can receive the goodness. So that's the first point. The sources of goodness are always there. We just have to learn to find them. The second point is that the goodness, the sources, just like the mountain streams, they are natural and they are inexhaustible. They never run out. The water from the streams will flow year after year. Natural goodness in life coming from the Tao. The Tao is an infinite source. The last part of this metaphor, we have the river. The streams flow down until they join together in the watercourse. They flow into the river in the heart of the valley, and the river goes through the valley, bringing benefits to all. So this is easy to see in nature. Smaller goodness join together to become a greater goodness. Sometimes we hear people talk about the law of attraction. This right here, what we're looking at right now, this is exactly how it works. More importantly, this is how we can have it work for us. Not just wish for the law of attraction, but to utilize the law of attraction actively. It's just another name for the goodness of the Tao. So as the river carries water throughout the length of the valley, wherever it goes, green plants grow. Greenness follows. Everything grows in profusion. Mapping this to life, this represents the Tao cultivator. Since ancient times, the Tao sages have observed the dynamics at play for the river and the cultivator. They emulate the characteristics of the river for their own lives. So their students follow what the sages have set as an example. They see that there are three important points. Number one, the river receives from the streams because of the lower position, as we have just talked about. That means humility is an absolute necessity if one wishes to receive goodness. Number two, the river gives its goodness to all living things, regardless of what they are. This too is representing the Tao, so cultivators, because of that, will be helpful to all without picking and choosing who should or should not be helped. And the third point is that once the river has nourished life along its banks, it continues to flow. It doesn't stick around. It doesn't stay to accept thanks. So Tao cultivators must be the same way, be unattached to the good works that they have done. They move on to the next task. So we can now add all of this together in the understanding of the valley. Know the honor, hold to the humility, be the valley of the world. The valley encapsulates both. Knowing the honor, being able to see the peaks of the mountain, but hold to the humility, hold to the river in the center of the valley. So, line 13. Here, we have a reiteration of the same characters as line 12. The same four characters repeat from this line to the last line. The contextual meaning is following the same flow as before. In other words, You incorporate both honor and humility, and you naturally become the valley. As the valley, you find that you have always been self-sufficient. We spoke of the valley representing abundance and prosperity. So this enables you to return to Pu, the principle of simplicity. Line 14, the eternal virtue shall be sufficient. So a central characteristic of the valley is self-sufficiency. When you embody the valley, you become self-sufficient as well. And when I say self-sufficiency, what I mean is it's got everything you need. The valley has everything that is needed. Temperate climate, shielded from weather extremes, rivers fed by streams from the surrounding mountains for water, flora and fauna in the wilderness area, fertile land that produce that natural abundance through farming that we were just talking about. So when we look at this, the realization is that there's sufficiency tied to eternal virtue. Let me explain what that means. The eternal virtue within is connected to your true self. This being your potential to perfect your virtuous nature. Everyone has this potentiality, and this is true in ancient times as well as in modern times. It is present in the wisest sage, just as it is in the most unwise person. Zen teachings point to the true self, and they call it self-nature. The true self is the source of everything in your life. It is the ultimate in self-sufficiency because, like the Tao, it requires nothing other than itself. It has the potential to create all that you need for any goal that you may wish to accomplish. When people do not know the Tao and they wander through life lost and adrift, if they're blinded by all the materialistic things out there, they're not able to manifest their potential to become more virtuous. And that is why Lao Tzu provides his teachings to guide us back on track. So the Tao within you is really all that you need. There's nothing further that you require, no special knowledge, no hidden techniques. You only need a mindful decision to commit yourself. And upon manifestation of this potential, it makes no demands on you and, again, has no requirements. So this brings us to line 15. Return to the state of plain wood. And this character, Pu, is one of the better known metaphors in the Tao. Returning to the Pu principle, the plain piece of wood that has never been worked on, and people used to translate this as the uncarved block. However, if it's a block, it's already been cut. So uncarved block is not the best translation of the character Pu. The better translation is just as you see right here. the plain piece of wood. Now, when you realize that you have everything you need, it's liberating. It frees you from the fear of being inadequate, insufficient. That fear is what drives most people to chase after things. That's how they get trapped in dukkha, or suffering. So, Pu can represent your spiritual nature in its most original, most primal state. And this is why it is oftentimes linked to the state of the infant. Returning to the state of simplicity, that just means reverting back to who you truly are. It's a return to the true self, or the self-nature spoken of in the Zen tradition. It is a simplicity that inspires you to simplify. What I mean is, it empowers you to let go of the clutter that you have accumulated, and that's how you increasingly go back to the simpler, purer state. And this includes discarding the masks that we put on for society. It is also about letting go of the facade that keeps us from being truly present. Now we have reached the end of the first three parts, or what we called the three sections of the explanation. There is one more section to go that will conclude the chapter. But before we go there, let us take a moment to bring the three parts together in an overview up to this point. What we have talked about can be summarized as the three things to know: the male, the white, and the honor. And also the three to hold: the female, the black, and the humility. Here is how we can represent that graphically. So the title of this slide is The Public, and with a two-way arrow, Tao Cultivators. And this is because I want to bring some comparison and thoughts about the two. In this world where we all live, there are clear patterns that can be seen by anyone who takes the time to observe them. What I mean by the public is the general public, or most people who are not really aware of the Tao or the meaning of the Tao teachings. And what I mean by the cultivators, it just includes everyone who studies and understands the Tao. The sages, their students, all of us in this gathering. So on the left-hand side, I want to present the three to know. This would be the yang. We talked about know the yang, but hold to the yin or embrace the yin. So the yin will be on the right-hand side, and that is the three to hold. Hold to the yin principle. And now we have the two columns that we can fill in with the specifics that Lao Tzu has talked about. And let me also note that I bring up the general public, or most people, because the three things to know happen to be what most people prefer most of the time. They do not hold to the yin principle. They hold to the yang principle. So, as an example, male representing the yang principle. It is the active and dynamic side of life. People tend to have too much of it. People tend to rush around and push ahead, oftentimes becoming loud and aggressive in the process. I think all of us have seen that from time to time. These are the people who are unaware of the Tao and therefore also unaware that the frantic rush is not the best way to do anything. Living in this world, we often hear expressions like, "Come on, let's go," or "full speed ahead," or questions like, "Are we there yet?" These all express aspects of this mentality. When it comes to the overcoming of obstacles, the same mentality frames it as a breakthrough. That is a very yang expression. So in this way, life becomes more about aggression, which we can see in the friction among people just in daily life. We know the friction can sometimes flare up into confrontations as people clash. And it can also be more about pursuit, speed. People put the emphasis on pursuing goals, and these goals are often material in nature. They are not necessarily pursuing intangibles like greater understanding or personal transformation. So for Tao cultivators, these are not the things that they hold to. Quite the opposite. Hold to the female is what Lao Tzu says. Now, the same part of the message says, know the male, which means Tao cultivators understand the sense of urgency, the sense of mission. It's just that they do not let that understanding become a stress factor. They know stressed out human beings are never at their best. So Tao cultivators hold to a measured approach to life. Observe and understand before taking action. That is the thoughtful approach. It is what it means to hold to the yin or hold to the female. Next, we have the white. So the public, most people, those who don't understand the Tao, this is what they hold to. People often focus on their image, the image they project, the facade they maintain, the surface level appearance. It is shallow, but that is how many people are. They want to be highly visible, they want to be seen, draw attention, be noticed. So that is what Tao cultivators know, but not what they hold to. That's the important distinction. Tao cultivators hold to the black. So they are like water. As Lao Tzu says in Tao Te Ching chapter 8, water stays in places people dislike. And that's because water flows to the lowest point in any area. Water never assumes the highest profile. So the black, holding to the black just means Tao cultivators hold to the less visible aspects. the support, the work that goes on behind the scenes. That's the resource, that's the foundation. Next, we have honor. This is what most people prefer. This is what people like and value. People want the height of honor, external praise, recognition, approval, and external validation. Now, as Tao cultivators, we know what all of that means. We know people gravitate to and even hunger for that validation or recognition, being placed in the spotlight or being placed on the pedestal. In fact, I would say that for many people, they want the spotlight and the pedestal so much that if there's no spotlight or pedestal around, they will bring their own. That is not what we hold to. We hold to the yin principle, representing here as humility. So this is holding on to the depth of humility rather than the height of honor. This is because the sense of worth, the sense of self-worth, comes from an internal source. It is not dependent on other people. This is also because humility comes from a place of being self-sufficient. This is where you know you become understanding and identified with the mindset that being anonymous is not detrimental. It can be liberating. It's the ability to blend in to the background and not be frequently stopped by people who recognize who you are. So this right here is the summary of holding on to the yin principle while knowing the yang principle. The yang to the left, the yin to the right. So I think many of you already are aware that I've been posting memes in recent months. This is the one from a week ago. It says, right from this chapter, know the masculine, hold to the feminine. 道德经 28. It's a coincidence that it happens to be the chapter we're discussing, but the commentary, I think, can be very helpful for us to understand the meaning. Know the yang principle, but hold to the yin principle. Know how to be strong, but choose to be gentle. Know how to advance, but learn when to yield. Know how to speak, but value the power of silence. So if you have not seen this before, there are many other memes just like it. You can find them in Derek Lin books on Facebook and also on the front page of Taoism.net. After we're done with this meeting, later on today, I will post another one. So I want to ask everyone to take a look and share them with the people you know who may benefit from Tao wisdom. Moving on to line 16. Plain wood splits, then become tools. So a plain piece of wood, 朴, is cut and worked on until it becomes something, which may be a tool. The metaphor is about turning raw material, the wood, into something useful. Applied to life, it's the raw material of life, turning that into something that you and I can use in a practical way. In the life context, raw material includes all the things that we can access, and also the people that we encounter. They become raw material in the sense that we can use them as tools to help us accomplish tasks. And this is also about applying the simplicity of Tao in everyday life. And think about what it means when we apply this to a group dynamics situation. When it is people that we shape into a useful part of a team, it means everybody brings something unique to the table. We can also apply this to ourselves, to family, to community, to workplace. I want to mention that because when I talk about a team, people tend to associate that with business. It's very true, business leaders can apply the simplicity of the Tao to their organization. And at the national level, it can be applied to the country. Line 17. The sage utilizes them, and this is referring to the tools that the wood is shaped into, or the raw material of life is shaped into. When it comes to people, the sages recognize the potential within the plain piece of wood. And when they bring them together, they are applying the metaphoric meaning of Pu to human beings, assembling a whole bunch of tools into a toolbox. This is about the potential in people. It's about bringing complementary talents together in a spirit of harmony. And that's because different individuals with different skill sets provide a more complete coverage of the abilities needed for a large and complex task. In the right combination, people fit with each other. They click into place like puzzle pieces because they complement each other so well. So people, I want to make sure that I mention that the sages are not talking about using people in a very insensitive way, seeing them as tools, but rather they are seen as individuals making contributions. And this is because a group of people working together harmoniously become much, much more powerful. They can accomplish anything. It is a transformation that the simplicity of the Tao becomes benefits for the people. So the right tool makes all the difference in the world for the right job. It is the same thing when you bring people to an endeavor. The right person at the right place at the right time can also make the biggest difference in the world. So in practical terms, we're talking about expertise, which may be financial, maybe marketing, maybe human resources or technical, but then utilizing that person's contribution without letting that label define the person's entire worth or let it limit their potential. So there is much more to talk about, and I think you can see that there are depths of the three different ways to explain eternal virtue that can connect together with the final section that we have here. We are getting close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to jump to the summary to talk about everything we have discussed so far today. Previously, our summary covered the first two parts, knowing the male or the active and dynamic, while holding to the serene or holding to the female, the yin principle. And this is when we understand the importance of active engagement, but holding to the yin principle, we remain calm when it's turbulent and chaotic. This makes it more powerful to bring both aspects of the yin and yang symbol together, to know and to hold. Takes you back to the primal state of your true nature, represented by the infant. And the second part is to know the white or the highly visible while holding on to the black, the unseen. And this is also yin and yang, understanding presentation, perception, image, but remain connected to the depth of expertise or resources, using both to know and to hold, balancing both, and you become limitless. So today, we've gone through the third part, and this is also yin and yang once again. Know honor, know those who are honored, activities, accomplishments that receive honor, but hold to the humility, hold to the humble. So understanding honor and recognition, appreciating that, know the glory, the high esteem, but still remain rooted and grounded, holding to the lower position. So it isn't that you don't know the value of social success. It's just that you are not allowing yourself to be defined by them. So melding the two together, using both yin and yang, means you embody the valley. And because of the abundance and self-sufficiency, it simplifies and streamlines your life. It's朴, simplicity. It is also going back to a state of the original. And this is all about attaining high achievements, but still remaining rooted, grounded, which people naturally respond to and respect. A lot of times we hear people talk about how a famous person is so down to earth and so approachable. It sticks out in their mind because such a person, in knowing the fame but holding to the humble, is embodying the Tao. So by being the valley of the world, we talked about openness, being receptive, accommodating, and ending with completeness and sufficiency. The bottom line is that the valley nurtures all things. The flourishing is the success of the valley. But the valley remains receptive and accommodating. The valley does not put itself behind closed doors or a gate that requires that you pay admission fees to enter. It is open to everyone. It is receiving of all visitors as well as all the streams from the mountains that flow into it. The last part is what we started talking about, but we'll need to conclude in our next meeting to utilize the simplicity. This is about groups of people, our connections with one another. There's unity of purpose. Functions can be delegated. So this is the sage in the role of leadership, or yourself in the role of a sage as a leader. You are already the leader in your own life. So you can manage your own life in the same way. Like the sage leading an effort from people, we too can place ourselves at the forefront of our lives. And from the group context, this gathering serves as yet another way to look at this teaching. This is how we progress together as a united front. So we will have a lot more to say about this in the next meeting. For now, I want to share the Tao. For easy access to Tao resources, visit my website, dereklin.com. There, you can click on links and see everything listed, such as Taoism.net, information about the Tao and this meeting. Our Facebook community, a place to discuss the Tao with fellow seekers. Our YouTube channel, recordings of all our previous meetings. My Amazon author page, books and audiobooks for further exploration. You can always go directly to this page at dereklin.com/links. When you see the benefits of the Tao in your life, share your experience through comments in Facebook and share these resources with friends who may also benefit. If you find my books or audiobooks helpful, please post your reviews on Amazon to guide others to the Tao. If you have connections to prisoners interested in the Tao, contact me through Derek Lin Books on Facebook, and I will send my books to them free of charge. This is the path I am on, so I can say sharing the Tao has transformed my life in incredible ways. I would like to invite you to come along. Let us travel together on the path in the journey of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.